products Nash in pricing, could you actually be producing too much of a good rather than too little?
I don't know what different the DP and IP is.
What we were just talking about before, the model where firms have different products, and when they choose their prices, taking as given the prices of the other firms.
No, maybe.
Anyone else have ideas? Yeah, Jacob?
They could be if you're creating a large deadweight loss by keeping that price high while you're producing quantity, right? Like if you have too
How
big a
so?
markup,
Go on. Yeah?
If you have too big a markup, then you're not taking into account the size of that deadweight loss.
Well, but that would mean that you would be producing too little. If you have a big markup, right, you're not taking into account the benefits you bring to consumers by increasing your quantity. So that would lead you to always produce too little.
Yeah.
But could you ever be producing too much? Bob?
For example, would be like dumping, where one firm produces an excess amount to try to drive the other firms so that their optimal choice is to simply leave the market so that because it's unprofitable.
Well, that's true, but even in just a simple static competition case, just this differentiated products national pricing, there's no exit, no anything. What could happen? Does anyone have a thought? Yeah, Charlie.
Is it that just like because you have these different products and consumers think they're so different, they'll buy more than they would if it was identical?
Not quite. Anyone else? Imagine you have two goods. One is really, really high quality, and one is low quality, right? Now, the high quality good is probably going to have a bigger markup because the rich people are going to be buying that, right? And they're more inelastic. And the low quality good, the poor people are going to be buying that, right? Now, actually, if you reduce the quantity of the low quality good that was in the market, more people would probably go to buy the high quality good. And that's actually more efficient from society's perspective. Because the high quality good is what most people should be buying. They're only not buying it because the markup is so high. And so the low quality good is just stealing production, is just stealing sales from the high quality good, which is really what everyone should be buying, right? And so there could actually be too much production of the low quality good because the markup of the high quality good is so high that the real externality from stealing the production of the high quality good could be larger than the externality on consumers of having your price be too high. Okay, so regardless of the social benefits or costs, though, firms can always benefit from internalizing the externalities among them, right? And because goods are substitutes, we've assumed, the firms are always going to want the other firms to reduce their quantities or raise their prices, right? And in fact, we can define two firms as being substitutes in exactly this way, right? Now, we say that if firms act to internalize either the real or pecuniary externalities between them, which might be a good thing or a bad thing from society's perspective. So if they internalize the externalities between the low quality and the high quality good, that's actually good because you get more people buying the high quality good. If they internalize those externalities, what do we say the firms are doing? Yeah, King Solomon. Yeah, they're colluding. Or forming a cartel. And my favorite term for this, which comes out of the Sherman Antitrust Act, is they're forming a combination in the restraint of trade. And this has been denounced in terms like this ever since since Adam Smith, and there's a quote in your syllabus about that, and it was made illegal under the Sherman Antitrust Act. So in the late 19th century, there were these companies that were getting really big and powerful, and people thought that they were combining to reduce trade. And so people tried to lobby against this and to get them to pass these antitrust laws to try to break up these companies. And so they had these pictures like this octopus representing Standard Oil, whose founder, John Rockefeller, donated this university. And in fact, I don't know if you guys have been in my office, but in my office there's an octopus who's named Rocky, who's named after this guy because of this cartoon. Okay, now once upon a time, it actually used to be legally enforceable to have a cartel agreement. In the US, that was true prior to the Sherman Antitrust Act. In continental Europe, it was true prior to the European Union reforms. And in many countries, it's still basically hardly illegal, like Peru. Britain made this illegal, was the first country to make this illegal all the way back in the 18th century. Luckily, in the United States, we're now probably the strongest country in the world in enforcing against cartels. And in particular, it's illegal for firms to explicitly make agreements about prices or services. Now, that's only true for competing firms, not for firms producing complementary goods, and we'll talk more about why that's the case next week. Even without directly communicating, if firms are thought to be tacitly coordinating their behavior without directly communicating, they can be prosecuted for that in principle, though it's really hard to do that in practice because it's hard to prove that they were doing that. And you can both go to jail for colluding like this or face civil penalties. And in the civil penalties, they do what's called treble damages, which is that you have to pay 3 times the amount of harm that you did to consumers, because the thought is that not all cartels are detected. So in order to deter people, you have to multiply by 3 the amount of that you pay, because you're only going to be caught with 1/3 probability. So the expected penalty is equal to the harm that you do to consumers. Now, there's many practical challenges today in running a cartel. Collusion is difficult as a result of all these laws trying to prevent it, and therefore it becomes possible only in relatively limited settings. And the basic problem when you're running a cartel is that, well, it benefits everyone if the cartel is created, all the firms if the cartel is created, not the consumers. There's a problem, which is that every individual firm is going to have an incentive to break with the cartel. And why is that the case, Kay?
Well, I mean, like, so, I mean, you're artificially trying to create, like, profits, so, like, you could want to, like, try to, like, take all of that because you're at, like, really nice plan.
That's right. So, like, if the prices are really high, you're going to be really tempted to grab all those sales for yourself. And in fact, that's just a consequence of the fact that we're internalizing externalities, right? Anytime we're internalizing externalities, that means by definition that someone on their own wouldn't want to act that way, right? That you're taking into account things that affect other people, not just yourself, right? Okay. And I could steal business from others by betraying the cartel. Now, the more ambitious that a cartel is, the less stable it's going to be. If they try to set really high prices, there's going to be more incentive to defect than if they set relatively low prices. And why is that, King?
Because so if you're charging a lot, then that means that there are a lot of people who would be willing to pay a lower price. So you can steal even more consumers and get still a very high price compared to your costs.
Yeah, so you're getting, the higher the prices, the more markup you're earning, and therefore the more temptation there is to get every additional sale, and the more sales there are to gain, right, by lowering the price a little bit. That's right. And so what that means is that firms will collude to the extent that they're able to deter cheating, right? So the amount of collusion that's likely to occur is proportional, right, to the amount that they're able to deter cheating. If they're only able to deter cheating a little bit, they're only going to be able to sustain a price slightly higher than what they would get without colluding, right? So every cartel needs to create an expectation among its members that if they betray the cartel, that they'll be punished in some way for that, right? Otherwise, the cartel is not going to work. So in some sense, this is very closely, the problem that the cartel faces is very closely related to the problem that the policymaker faces, right? The policymaker wants to punish people, detect and punish people who are forming a cartel, and encourage the people in the cartel to betray the cartel. And the cartel, on the other hand, wants to punish people who betray the cartel, right? And detect the betrayals of the cartel. So you've got this sort of like double enforcement situation going on, right? And Stigler's theory of oligopoly is based on exactly this dance between the enforcement agency and the firms, right? So in order to run an effective cartel and deter cheating, Connor, what do firms have to do? What is a cartel to do?
Well, when they do catch people cheating, they have to like punish them very
Mm-hmm.
severely. And make sure it doesn't exist.
What other things do they need to do?
They need to somehow try to like minimize the like time period during which people could look before they do the reaction, right?
Yeah, those are two important things. I mean, just to begin with, they first have to be able to determine what agreement they want to make, right? Which can be difficult because as in any externality problem, right, the information is split up along a bunch of people. And we found that that makes lots of problems, right, for trying to deal with externalities, right? And if the government's breathing down your neck and you can't communicate about what your situations are, that makes it even harder, right? Second, the firms have to have a clear understanding of what is and is not cheating, right? Because of course, if anything that the firm does that it hasn't been doing forever is considered cheating, there's going to be no flexibility to respond to what's going on in the industry. And the companies are all going to go down the toilet, right? On the other hand, if you allow firms to do whatever they want, right, then they're going to completely screw up the collusive agreement, right? So this is very much like the centralization versus decentralization thing we were talking about, right? You have to allow people some flexibility, but on the other hand, if you give them total flexibility, then that's destructive of the system. They have to be able to detect cheating by members and distinguish this from just things that are going on in the background, right? So you basically have to be able to catch people and make sure that that's not just innocent things they're doing, the same way that a tax authority has to catch people who are cheating on their taxes and not just, aggressively using the tax code, right? You have to have a cost-effective means of punishment, right? So just as we talked about in criminal justice, it's costly to punish people, right? And so you've got, ideally you want to do that in a way that is like a fine, where you just transfer from one firm to another. You don't actually destroy resources by doing that, right? One way you can do that is that imagine one firm betrays the cartel a little bit in this period. You might say, well, in the future, your market share allocation is going to go down, right? And so you're going to have to pay for that by getting less ability to make sales in the future. That's an efficient way because you can just transfer that to another firm. A less efficient way is to have everyone suddenly start cutting their prices down back to cost, because that hurts both the people who do it and the others, right? So that's a less efficient way from the perspective of the firms to do that. You also have to, as Connor said, be quick about it, right? Because you don't want a firm to make a bunch of profits before you catch them and punish them, because then it might be worth it for them to get those additional profits for that period of time rather than maintaining the agreement for the future, right? Okay. So Stigler's theory is based on exactly these necessities. And based on these necessities, he develops factors that he thinks facilitate or prevent collusion. And Jackson, what are some of those factors?
All right, so a few of the factors were the substitutability of transactions. So you need to have, you need to make sure that all your firms are selling like precisely the same good and there's not small differences.
Yeah.
And you also need to make sure that the same thing applies to the people buying.
Yeah.
You also need, he said that it worked more effectively when you had small markets because you'd be able to catch people, who were affecting more quickly.
Exactly. Yeah, those are both great things. So he says having large and heterogeneous buyers is harmful. That's what Jackson was saying. Because if you have a large buyer or they're heterogeneous, it's really hard to keep track of like who should be getting what. Because there's these big lumpy guys. And there's going to be a huge temptation just to get one of those buyers to buy from you, right? And that's going to undermine your ability to collude. On the other hand, if you have small homogeneous buyers, you can like slice up very precisely exactly what quantity every firm gets. In fact, I think the worst situation is if you had three sellers and three large buyers of like equal